Jeffrey Epstein, the man who turned his life into a private club for the elite, but ended it in a concrete box measuring 2 by 3 meters. In 2019, when the list of his influential friends became public knowledge, Epstein found himself in Metropolitan Prison, awaiting a trial that could send him to prison for the rest of his life. But he didn't make it to trial. On the night of August 10th, strange things began to happen in the prison. 2 surveillance cameras pointed at his cell suddenly malfunctioned. 2 guards who were supposed to check on him every 30 minutes fell fast asleep for several hours. And Jeffrey's cellmate was transferred to another wing just 1 day before the incident. At 6:30 a.m., Jeffrey Epstein was found dead. Officially, he decided to end his life. But when pathologists saw the fractures in his neck, many questions arose. How could a bad man of such weight do this while sitting on a low bed? Was it the weight of his conscience, or did someone from his list of contacts press the delete witness button? We will never know because 3 hours after the autopsy, his cell was already being cleaned with bleach. Jeffrey Dahmer, one of the most notorious villains in history, who hoped to spend the rest of his 15 life sentences in Columbia prison cleaning and reading the Bible. Dahmer had no idea that his end would come not from justice, but from an ordinary metal bar in the hands of a fellow inmate. On November 28, 1994, Dahmer and 2 other inmates were sent to clean the showers. One of them was Christopher Scarver, a man who believed he heard a voice from above. When the guards left the 3 of them unattended for 20 minutes, Scarver took a heavy steel bar from under his jacket, which he had secretly taken from the gym. He cornered Dahmer and asked, "Did you do those terrible things?" Without waiting for an answer, Scarver struck him several times in the head. Dahmer did not even try to resist. Half an hour later, he was dead in the ambulance. Ironically, the man who took so many lives ended his own on the dirty floor of a shower room, to the sound of dripping water. By the way, if you think this was instant karma, now is the time to like this video. Jimmy Savile. In Britain, he was considered a saint. He was friends with the royal family, hosted popular shows, and donated millions to hospitals. But beneath his colorful suits lurked one of the most evil people of the 20th century. Savile was a master manipulator and passed away in 2011 without ever answering for any of his actions. He met his end at the age of 84 in his luxurious apartment in Leeds. It was a peaceful death in a warm bed, 2 days before his birthday. Thousands of people attended his funeral, and his coffin was covered with gold foil. However, the celebration did not last long. Literally a year after his death, hundreds of stories emerged from people whose lives he had ruined. The nation's anger was so great that his huge tombstone, worth thousands of pounds, had to be demolished and destroyed in a crusher to prevent it from being turned into ruins by protesters. Savile thought he had outsmarted everyone by leaving gracefully. But in the end, his name became synonymous with absolute evil, and his ashes rest under an unmarked layer of concrete. Ariel Castro, the man who turned an ordinary house in Cleveland into a real prison for 3 girls for 10 long years. When he was finally caught in 2013, the judge handed down a sentence. Life imprisonment, plus another 1,000 years on top of that, to make sure he never got out. Castro cried in court and begged for mercy, but a cold reception awaited him at the Orient prison. He was placed in a protective unit so that other inmates would not help him end his life early. But Castro did not last even a month. On September 3, 2013, during the evening rounds, he was found in his cell. He used bedding to hasten his departure. Many believe that he simply could not bear life in the cage he himself had once created for others. The strangest thing is that a few minutes before the end, he was reading the Bible. Apparently he was hoping for forgiveness, which he never received from this world. Wayne Gacy, the killer clown, who hid a real warehouse in the basement of his house under the guise of a respectable citizen. When the time came to carry out his death sentence in 1994, Gacy behaved as if he were simply visiting the doctor. He ordered a bucket of fried chicken, shrimp, and French fries for his last meal, showing no remorse. His end was supposed to be a triumph of modern medicine. A lethal injection. Everything was calculated down to the second. Gacy was strapped to a gurney. The needles were inserted. But then the equipment malfunctioned. The mixture of drugs that was supposed to send him into oblivion suddenly froze right in the IV tubes. Instead of dying instantly, Gacy had to lie there and wait 18 minutes while the prison guards frantically changed the equipment. The whole process was accompanied by the roar of the crowd outside the prison, where people ate popcorn and held signs reading, "Clown, it's time to go." Gacy's last words were as defiant and obscene as possible. He remained true to his image until the very end. When the second attempt finally worked, one of the most evil people in history simply collapsed before the eyes of witnesses. Ironically, the man who took the lives of 33 young people ended his days in the complete silence of a sterile room under the watchful eye of television cameras. Albert Fish. An old man who looked like someone's kind grandfather, but was actually a nightmare for early 20th century New York. He was called the Gray Man. When he was finally caught and sentenced to the electric chair at Sing Sing prison in 1936, Fish behaved in the strangest way possible. He smiled. He told the guards that it would be the greatest pleasure he had been waiting for his whole life, but the reality turned out to be more prosaic and painful. Fish was obsessed with inflicting pain on himself. During his lifetime, he drove dozens of needles into his body. When the current was turned on, these very needles inside his muscles created a short circuit. The process did not go according to plan. Instead of one discharge, several were required. Witnesses recalled the smell of burning and how the old man's body literally arched in iron shackles. There was no pleasure on his face as he had deluded himself into believing, only a mask of horror. Fish ended his life in a cloud of smoke, proving that the electric chair is equally effective against monsters and those who imagine themselves to be superhuman. Like this, if you think such an ironic retribution is the best ending for this story. Richard Ramirez, known as the Night Stalker. The man who kept Los Angeles in fear in the 1980s by drawing pentagrams on his palms. Ramirez mocked the justice system for years, declaring in court, "See you in hell." He waited more than 20 years for his execution, living on death row and receiving hundreds of letters from adoring female fans. However, he never got the gas or the injection. His end was long, dirty, and devoid of any drama. In 2013, he was diagnosed with lymphatic cancer. The disease literally ate him from the inside. The one who considered himself a servant of darkness ended his days in an ordinary hospital bed, yellowed from intoxication and barely able to breathe. His teeth, which had always frightened witnesses, rotted away, and his body turned into a skeleton covered with skin. At the moment of his death, there were no fans or the master he worshipped by his side. He simply ceased to exist at 3 a.m. at Marine General Hospital. The irony is that Ramirez feared aging and infirmity more than anything else in the world, but that is exactly what became his final punishment. Ted Bundy. Charismatic, educated, and completely empty inside. When he was taken to the Old Smokehouse in 1989, as the electric chair was called in Florida, Bundy no longer smiled his trademark smile. He spent his last night in tears, trying to bargain for a few more days of life by revealing new details about his crimes. But time was up. At 7 a.m., he was strapped to the chair. To ensure better conductivity, they shaved the top of his head, the very thing he was so proud of, which charmed women. When the guard put a leather mask on him, Bundy trembled. 2,000 volts passed through his body, and at that moment, the crowd outside, more than 2,000 people, erupted in applause. People set off fireworks and grilled sausages right outside the prison walls. Bundy always wanted attention, and he got it. His end became a national holiday. After everything, Bundy's body was cremated and his ashes were scattered in the mountains, the same place where he once left his victims. The circle was complete. It was the end of a man who thought he was smarter than the system, but literally burned up in it. Andrei Chikatilo, the most notorious criminal in the Soviet Union. His case was so high profile that he was kept in a steel cage during the trial to prevent the victims' relatives from tearing him apart. When the sentence, death, was announced, Chikatilo suddenly remembered all his illnesses, wrote complaints to Yeltsin, and begged for clemency, promising to contribute to science. In February 1994, he was taken out of his cell in the Novocherkassk prison. He was not told where he was being taken to avoid hysterics. The procedure was standard for the time. He was taken to a specially equipped basement room. Chikatilo, who had taken the lives of dozens of people, looked like a pitiful, trembling old man in his final seconds. The executioner simply pulled the trigger. A shot to the back of the head put an end to the darkest chapter in the history of Soviet criminalistics. No cameras, no farewell speeches, no audience. Just a muffled bang in the basement and an unmarked grave in the prison cemetery under a number. Chikatilo left the same way he had acted, in darkness and silence, leaving behind nothing but pain and a number on a wooden stake. Joseph Mengele, the angel of death from Auschwitz, who conducted horrific experiments on humans. Unlike many others on our list, Mengele managed to escape to Latin America and hide under false names for decades. He lived in constant fear that Mossad would come for him, and this paranoid fear became his constant companion. But his end was not a tribunal. It was absurd. In 1979, living in Brazil under the name Wolfgang Gerhardt, Mengele went to the beach. While swimming in the ocean, he suffered a stroke. The man who decided who would live and who would die with a flick of his finger simply drowned in salt water, unable to move his arm. He was buried under a false name, and for 6 more years, the world did not know that Mengele was no longer alive. It was not until 1985 that his remains were exhumed and identified. His bones are now kept at the Medical Institute of São Paulo and are used by students to study anatomy. This is perhaps the cruelest and most fitting irony of history. A man who tortured the bodies of others for the sake of science has himself become nothing more than a teaching aid. Charles Manson, a man who did not kill himself, but forced others to do so, creating a crazy cult around him. Manson planned to start a world war, but spent almost 50 years in solitary confinement, turning from a prophet into a prison freak with a swastika tattooed on his forehead. In his final years, he was a frail shadow of his former self. In 2017, his body began to fail. Intestinal bleeding and cancer. Manson was transferred to a regular civilian hospital, his leg chained to the bed. Police stood guard around the hospital to prevent fans from trying to steal his body. Manson died at the age of 83. His end was devoid of any of the mysticism he preached. After his death, a legal battle over his body ensued between his followers and his grandson. In the end, he was cremated, and his ashes were scattered in the woods. The man who wanted to change the world through chaos ended his days in a sterile hospital room to the sound of medical monitors, remembered in history only as an example of how dangerous words can be when spoken by a madman. This is how those who decided they were above human laws end up. Some end up in flames, some in a basement, and some forgotten by everyone in a hospital ward. Whose story ending did you find the most fitting? Write your thoughts in the comments, and we'll discuss them. And don't forget to subscribe, as there are many more stories ahead that are not suitable for dinner conversation. See you in the next video.